NASA Cybersecurity Implementation and Compliance, presented by Joel Erickson, in accordance with CSIA 412. Today's presentation will cover the following topics. The first topic will cover why and how legislation has impacted NASA's cybersecurity position. The next topic to be reviewed is what information security standards and policies NASA currently utilizes within the agency itself. Lastly, we will cover key findings from recent security assessment that was conducted on the behalf of NASA. Why the importance of cybersecurity? In 10 minutes of watching this live honeypot, the United States of America was attacked over 278 times from various countries around the world. This is just 10 minutes of one day. Imagine how many attacks the nation sees on average. The numbers are staggering and absolutely astounding that we are able to repel and stop this volume of attacks day in and day out. NORS is a honeypot that detects live attacks as they happen and log what type of attack is being launched and who the target and attacker is. NASA is not above these types of attacks. NASA has a wealth of information that is critical to modern day society. The discoveries made by NASA will continue to help our nation and the world move forward into a better way of life. This makes NASA a very big target for a lot of very bad actors. How legislation has impacted NASA's current cybersecurity position. Legislation runs all agencies of the United States. NASA, while not thought of in the same regards as, say, NSA, CIA, or FBI, still has many national secrets that must be protected. Over the years, legislation has always sought to protect our nation's assets at all costs. This still rings true today. Today's threats aren't necessarily from another world power or even another standing army. Today's main threat is from cyberspace, where a small group of motivated individuals can be just as devastating as an army could be. According to NextGov, the United States of America is attacked millions of times a day, spread throughout all the agencies nationwide. This is why it is imperative that legislation has the right laws and policies in place to ensure America is protected to the fullest of our capabilities. This also applies to the protection of NASA. Legislation is a key component to the foundation of cybersecurity, which is then used as a base for policy to be implemented as framework for NASA's defensive posture moving forward to keep its networks and information protected from attackers. What influences security policies? Typically, in order for a policy to be changed, something has got to be taken or stolen or a breach to happen. Once this does occur, an investigation is launched. During the investigation, they try to figure out the who, the why, what was taken, the severity of the information stolen. Once they've discovered these key points, the information is then sent on to the appropriate committees. Those committees then assess the damage, figure out how to fix the situation, and then figure out who is going to be in charge as far as the committee manager or director to implement the changes necessary. Once they've decided that, the policy, standards, directives, and executive orders are then executing accordingly to prevent further breaches or thefts from happening in the future regarding this method. As you can see on the slide, these are just a few examples of what could cause the change in policies or how an agency conducts its business. There are oftentimes the discovery that is made after the fact that information was lost or stolen. This then leads to a thorough investigation of what party is liable and how the breach happened in the first place. After the investigation, a resolution is then made, and the appropriate committee or director will implement the changes necessary to ensure that the whole process is fixed and the agency is now compliant with the new standard. Mandated cyber collaboration. It is important to note that all agencies are being directed to collect and share any and all information regarding cyber attacks and the parties responsible by Executive Order 13636, improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. This mandated executive order hinges on all agencies such as NASA doing their part and becoming compliant and following suit. With all agencies on the same page and understanding what types of attacks are being conducted, this will then help to outline the bigger picture of the attacking enemies going after the data. This will also allow the government to establish a process to improve cybersecurity information sharing and collaboratively develop and implement risk-based standards. NASA will benefit immensely from this information gathered and shared by the other agencies. With every communication of an attack that is shared, it helps to strengthen the entire network that is being protected and allows the agencies to share and build best practices based on the types of attacks they are seeing, what's happening, and who's going after what. Framework will be a crucial asset to NASA to ensure that all day-to-day business is properly assessed for any potential risk or threat. Currently, the model used already requires that the administrator will review all national security program risks, mitigate these risks where applicable, and provide a risk assessment of the agency's national security programs. Since this is already mandated, it will not be hard to bring framework into fruition and to help NASA to apply the principles and best practices of risk management to improving the security and resilience of critical infrastructure, which is paramount in establishing where the biggest risks are and how to mitigate them accordingly with as little disruption to everyday business as possible. Critical infrastructure, security, and resilience. NASA must be able to withstand and rapidly recover from all attacks, foreign or domestic in nature. Achieving this will require integration with the national preparedness system across prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. Of all agencies who are employing this policy, NASA is one of the biggest targets to choose from. Employing the system will ensure that NASA is doing their part in providing effective and impactful physical security in all their facilities and locations. This focus will help to enforce and reduce vulnerabilities, minimize consequences, identify and disrupt threats, and hasten response and recovery efforts related to critical infrastructure. Considering how many of the nation's discoveries are made in NASA facilities, this policy is paramount to keeping those trusted secrets safe from any kind of physical threat. NASA's current information security standards and policies. NASA currently uses the FIPS 200 standard to help ensure compliancy with their data protection. Federal Information Processing Standard 200, or FIPS 200, specifies minimum security requirements for federal information and information systems in 17 security-related areas. All agencies must comply and meet the minimum mandatories for security requirements proposed by FIPS 200. These mandatories are designed to help agencies implement procedures and policies that will help to set the standard for protecting all agencies and their data at all levels. Without a standard in place, there is no one way to ensure that all agencies are compliant across the board. This is due to the fact that each agency will be implementing its own configurations and security measures as they saw fit. This would make it impossible to enforce a standard that all agencies would be able to adhere to. In this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about FIPS 200. We're going to cover three subcategories inside the actual standard. The first one we're going to cover is access control. Organizations must limit information systems access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users, or devices, and including other information systems, and to the types of transactions and functions that authorized users are permitted to exercise. So, to break that down, that's making sure that the right people have the right access to the right information, and that the ones that do not have the correct security requirements or do not have the clearance to access certain information are not able to do so. This is very important so that the wrong people don't get a hold of the wrong stuff. For instance, look at Snowden. If you saw what he did, he used social engineering to get people's passwords to then take information to then leak. That's what access control is in place for, to stop. The next one we're going to cover is awareness training. Organizations must ensure managers and users of organizational information systems are made aware of the security risks associated with their activities and of the applicable laws, executive orders, directives, policies, standards, instructions, regulations, or procedures related to the security of organizational information systems, and to ensure that organizational personnel are adequately trained to carry out their assigned information security related duties and responsibilities. So what that's saying is training is paramount to ensure that the staff and the employees are aware of possible attacks, what to do in the instance of it, who to contact, also to know what policies they have to follow, what the standards and procedures are. This is key in today's world, with all the cyber attacks going on. You're only as good as your most well-trained individual. Computers generally do not make mistakes, but humans do. And that is the biggest threat to any security standard or any agency when you look at what happens and who actually caused it. The next category we're going to look at is risk assessment. Risk assessment. Organizations must periodically assess the risk to organizational operations, including mission, functions, image, or reputation, organizational assessments, and individuals resulting from the operation of organizational information systems and associated processing, storage, transmission of organizational information. Quick way to say it, everything has a risk associated to it. Different tasks are assigned different levels of risk. At some point, if the risk becomes too great, then it doesn't make sense in a business sense or in a risk sense to let that current process continue. So risk assessment is very critical. Every process has a risk assessment assigned to it. That way they know exactly what could happen, what may happen, and if they're willing to take the risk in case it does happen. So it's very important. So that's the three major points that we're going to cover for FIPS 200. What about ISO 27002? In the previous slide, we looked at FIPS 200 and we looked at three subcategories: access control, awareness training, and risk assessment. We're going to look at what ISO 27002 has in the same categories. So the first one, access control. The organization's requirement to control access to information assets should be clearly documented in an access control policy and procedures. Network access and connections should be restricted. Information access should be restricted in accordance with the access control policy to secure logon password management control over privileged utilities and restricted access to program source code. So basically what they're saying is you need to have a process, you need to have an outline, you need to have a procedure in place to ensure how the access control is being implemented. The next one is going to be awareness training. Awareness training. Does awareness training commence with formal induction process designed to introduce the organization's security policies and expectations? Does ongoing training include security requirements, legal responsibilities, and business controls, as well as training in the correct use of information processing facilities, logon procedures, use of software packages, and information on the disciplinary process being implemented? So, again, to reiterate, training is the biggest asset to any agency they can have. The weakest link in the chain is the employees themselves. The more you have them trained, the better off you'll be as far as security processes. There's no 100% way to protect from employee error or even human error, but the more training you have, the less likely it will be to happen. The last category was risk assessment. Do the risk assessments identify, quantify, and prioritize risks against criteria for risk acceptance and objectives relevant to the organization? Does the risk assessment include the systematic approach of estimating the magnitude of the risk and the process of comparing the estimated risk against the risk criteria to determine the significance of the risk? So basically what they're saying, and that one is the juice worth the squeeze. In other words, if I'm going to do this process, this could happen. Is it critical for me to do this process even though this bad thing may happen or this undesirable effect may happen? So at that point it comes down to the best business case. Does it make sense to do this? Is this really going to be the best for our agency? Is the impact going to be worth what we may lose in the process of doing said task? So that's very important. As I said in the previous slide, all risks are given a risk level, and that way they know, does this make good sense on a business or for the mission at hand? Comparing and contrasting the two standards. In the two previous slides, we looked at FIPS 200 and ISO 27002. In this slide, we'll be comparing both of them against each other. After reading both standards, it's apparent that FIPS 200 is a general overview of what should be implemented in all government agencies. ISO 27002 is a more granular approach of how to go about implementing those policies and standards. For instance, in access control, FIPS is standardizing the limitation of users' access to system and data, whereas ISO 27002 is more like a checklist of how you're restricting that access and what levels of access restriction are you implementing for systems and users alike. Another good point to analyze is the risk assessment. FIPS 200 mandates that a risk assessment must be conducted to ensure that all facets of information and systems are being protected at the required levels. ISO 27002 is getting into the more finite details, such as estimating the magnitude of the risk and is the risk relevant to the mission objectives of the agency. Upon reading both standards, it's interesting that NASA does not implement ISO 27002, or at least use it to enforce and enhance the FIPS 200 standard. FIPS 200 seems too broad and leaves too many variables to be questioned, whereas ISO 27002 asks more pointed questions of how and why does this make sense for the mission at hand. Key findings and results from recent NASA security plan assessment. Every agency connected to the United States government uses a system security plan. NASA is no different in this manner. In order to protect the discoveries made and the data collected, NASA has to employ their own SSP. All SSPs mirror the NIST SP 800-53, and this lays the groundwork of how and why the security plan must be set up to become compliant. The SSP is a giant cybersecurity blueprint for the agency. It lays out how the agency protects its data, even outlines what data to protect, and at what level is data protection not needed based on the risk assessment. These guidelines are critical in maintaining their compliancy with all federal mandates. After all, NASA reported the highest number of cybersecurity incidents in 2013. Paradoxically, it also has one of the best track records among federal agencies complying with security regulations, according to a report to Congress by the Office of Management and Budget. This is largely because of the focus that has been placed on cybersecurity and ensuring that the SSD is updated regularly and strictly adhered to. In the next few slides, we'll be covering some controls that can be implemented in part of the security plan assessment. The first one we're covering is technical controls. Technical controls are used to protect the systems and users that work within the network or have access to the network via remote access. This is important because this can encompass things like user access, remote access, wireless access, and many more. All these aspects can create huge holes in network defense if not properly secured correctly. Something as simple as a user not changing their password or not making it complex enough can provide an attacker the hole they need to penetrate that system or network. This is why it is so important to have the proper technical controls in place and have them configured correctly. A couple of technical controls that can be implemented. The first one is access control. Access control relates to the ability of NASA to permit or deny access to computer systems locations, and system information based on a user's assigned duties. These controls encompass many different aspects of account identifiers such as passwords, physical access, badges and tokens, and user permissions to ensure the proper level of system access. This control is also responsible for any type of warning banners, alerting users that if they use the system for unlawful use, they can be charged with a crime. Access control is how NASA secures the system on a user access level to provide yet another layer of security. Another control to implement for technical is the identification and authentication control family, which relates to the activities and provisions which ensure the identity of a given entity requesting access to NASA resources. The control addresses the creation, management, usage, and protection of identities for their user. NASA employs NIST SP 800-63 to ensure that their electronic authentication policies line up accordingly to the required standards. Many times authentication is used alongside of user IDs and passwords to add an extra level of security. Often authenticators are used for employees who work remote and have to open connections to the network from outside. This is where it's critical that all the pieces line up accordingly to ensure that the network is protected at all times, even if a small hole has been made in the network defense for the employees to work. The next control we will cover is operational controls. Operational controls are important to ensure that every task is managed and controlled appropriately and securely. The controls in this section help to ensure that the employees of NASA are being trained accordingly with federal mandates. It also covers how incidents are managed as well as what contingency plans are used in a particular situation based on the mission at hand. Operation controls are the backbone to every agency and their SSP. Two key operational controls to implement in any SSP is awareness and training and incident response and management. Awareness and training. An agency is only as strong as its employees. It is critical that the employees of NASA are trained and up to speed on the current security issues and vulnerabilities threatening NASA as a whole. The Security Awareness and Training Control family relates to the information security knowledge requirements for all users of agency information and information systems, and the development and delivery of courses and other training resources to enable and validate satisfaction of those requirements. Satisfaction of training requirements is a precursor to access controls for NASA information system resources. It is important to have a plan in place that outlines when employees are mandated to take additional trainings or seminars. This will help to ensure that all personnel supporting information system whose role includes significant information security responsibilities comply with the applicable role-based security awareness and training requirements. Incident response and management. It is important to have a process or policy in place should an incident occur. This is critical in ensuring that the appropriate action is taken as quickly as possible to mitigate the impact the breach is causing immediately. The management aspect of this entails that the incident response manager to do the following actions. First, have a strong and swift incident response policy that will help to lessen damage caused by an attack or event that may not be controllable. Accidents have always happened, but the important thing is that NASA has planned for just about any contingency that is possible and stands ready to deploy the incident response team if need be to handle any situation. The second action item is to make sure that everything is documented and the response team is ready to go. This is key in order to take the damage that has been caused and mitigate it as quickly as possible. The last control we're going to cover in the SSP is management controls. Management controls relate to the legal requirements that NASA develop, document, and implement a comprehensive program under the direction of senior management to provide security for information and information systems. It is important to have management controls. These controls assist NASA with planning for the future by helping to mitigate any risk or flaws in a management plan. This also allows the agency to restructure and reassess the current plan and adjust accordingly. This is also a good place to look for ways to help cost and budget for the entire agency. Many times, an expensive project may cost more in the beginning, but once implemented, can save the agency far more than they spent in the long run. Two key management controls to implement in any SSP are program management and risk assessment. Program management is very important to the management controls. The framework of NASA's Information Security Program are referenced in the policies, procedures, milestones, metrics, and responsibilities of the Information Security Program, which together make up the Information Security Program Plan employed by NASA. The program management also requires the CAISO will develop and document a information security program which will then be used agency-wide. Risk assessment. With everything that is done in the cybersecurity world or even the work of businesses, there's always some risk. Every task or project is assigned a certain risk factor from the management team planning the project or endeavor. The biggest takeaway is outlining the risk and being able to see where the issues may lie in advance. The goal of effective risk management is to articulate the risks that threats may have on agency-owned assets, data, and personnel, and to minimize the risk by applying security controls. It is important to note NASA utilizes guidance of NIST SP 800-30, Risk Management Guide for Information Technology Systems, and NIST SP 800-37, Guide for Applying the Risk Management Framework to Federal Information Systems. In conclusion, NASA has done its research and built a strong practice around protecting its data from harm. No system is unreachable and no network impenetrable. This has been proven time after time. These threats are not going to fade away into the night. The attacks will get better as technology gets better. The attackers will get smarter. This is inevitable as we as a society become smarter ourselves. There's always those who will use that knowledge to do harm onto others. NASA is acutely aware of this and is constantly changing and adapting their defenses to accommodate the changes in technology and the resources available to attackers. This is why it is imperative that policies and standards be updated regularly and that data protection be at the forefront of all that is done in the agency. Our nation is constantly under attack, with agencies like NASA taking the lead in cybersecurity and mandating that these protocols and standards be implemented. It is apparent that they are doing their part in keeping the hard-earned discoveries and priceless data safe from harm from our nation's enemies. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you and have a great day.